Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this CoinDesk webinar sponsored by eToro. Today, we're going to talk about crypto markets. A lot has been going on recently, and I'm sure that recent movements have most of us puzzled. So today, we're going to unpack some of the recent trends and extrapolate forward. We're going to talk about market sentiment and what drives it, the role of social media, Bitcoin maturity, the potential impact of institutional interest and regulation. There's so much to get through. Not a lot of time, so we won't even get to everything that I want to cover, but I do know that it will be a wide-ranging conversation, especially given the experts that are joining us today. We're joined by Yoni Yassia, who's the founder of eToro, and economist and investor Tor de Meester. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yoni, I'd like to start with you. eToro is the world's largest social investment network, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us about the origin. How did it get started?
I've been a trader since I was quite young. I'm fascinated about capital markets since I was 13, and I'm also a developer myself. And when we started eToro in 2006, brainstorming about eToro, I started it with my older brother, who always used to make fun that I have an accountant fetish, working with multiple screens and charts and numbers. And the idea of eToro came up with how do we open the markets for everyone to trade and invest in a simple and transparent way. So how do we make the markets more accessible and more enjoyable for people to trade and invest? And through that journey, we basically set up a social network where people can actually see, follow, and automatically copy other traders. So you feel less intimidated by the markets, and it becomes less complex as you can basically browse the markets while also looking at other people's activity, talking to them, and obviously, if you want, automatically copying their trades.
And learning while you're doing that.
Exactly.
And how did you discover Bitcoin?
I was actually very early into Bitcoin in 2010. We found it online. I was actually talking about cryptocurrencies, not cryptocurrencies, but digital currencies since I think 2008, because we obviously trade currencies on eToro, like the euro, the dollar, the pound, and it seemed to me always that it makes sense to have internet currencies and global currencies. And I think my brother actually sent me Bitcoin in 2010 and told me you should look at that because you're always talking about one day there's going to be internet currencies, and everybody thought I was crazy. And so we took a look at it. We started analyzing it. We got extremely fascinated by the technology and the fact that you can transfer money from one place to another. I started engaging in Bitcoin talk and actually paying some programmers in Bitcoin back in 2012 and 13. And we looked at a project, I think that's when I met Tor in San Jose in 2013, which was called Colored Coins back then, which was how do you use the Bitcoin blockchain in order to create new types of assets, or basically what became tokenization. We originally thought to do it on top of Bitcoin and actually worked with Vitalik to write the original Colored Coins paper, and obviously Vitalik thought it would be better to do it on a newer, better blockchain.
And we sort of know how that panned out. So you weren't just interested in Bitcoin back in the early days. You were actually using it to pay people.
Yes, we found a couple of, we started the project Colored Coins and found people, what is called today bounties. We found people that were willing to work for crypto.
Tor, how did you discover Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I had been wanting to, make economics more practical for myself. I had been studying economic theory, but then started applying it to markets in around 2008-9. In 2011, I had my own financial newsletter. So I was basically building a model portfolio that people could follow, and I was really trying to find things that were out of the box. I wasn't so much into blue chip stocks. I was more looking at things that held their value even through crises. Because in Belgium, that's where I'm from, we had this huge banking crisis, and it really was very close for the major banks to have collapsed. And actually, one of the largest bankruptcies, which is Fortis, did happen in Belgium. So I was looking for assets that had low counterparty risk, and so I was looking a lot at gold, but at the same time, it felt like that community was it was kind of the previous generation, more the baby boomers who were really into that. And so I was doing a research trip in Latin America to kind of see how people act and how they position themselves in more crisis-prone economies. And really, it was in Argentina that I discovered Bitcoin in 2011. Some friends of mine were mining Bitcoin literally in their basement because the capital controls wouldn't allow them to buy it on Mt. Gox, on the exchange at the time, which was abroad. And so it really showed how transnational Bitcoin was right away. And pretty early on, I hired a graphic designer from Argentina, even after I had left, and I just kept paying him in Bitcoin. And there was no other way at the time to really pay him effectively over the internet. So that really, it just showed me very early on that there was something there, and so that was enough for me to start researching. And then I was lucky enough to be able to interview one of the very respected core developers, who's also a Belgian, Pieter Weule. And then from there on, I just kept reading, and I've been full-time into Bitcoin since 2013.
It's fascinating that the two of you both came at this from completely different points of view. One is from currencies and one from economics, but you both were actually using Bitcoin back in the early days for a very similar function, and through that realized the potential that could have. Tor, you have over 170,000 followers on Twitter. I'd like to talk a bit about social media, and that's really quite staggering. So obviously you know a thing or two about how it works. What do you think of Twitter as a communication tool?
Yeah, so I really enjoy Twitter. I like how simple it is. Like, there's this character limit. You can add an image as well. But so Twitter is really going to curate your output when it appears in the feed of somebody else. So even if you have a long tweet storm, that's what's called when you tag tweets, like you weave them together and you kind of make a longer article using Twitter. Even if you do that, Twitter is going to compress that so that whoever is following you is only going to see maybe the first and the last one, and then it's up to them to decide whether they want to read everything. And it's just a great medium to share links. So it's an aggregator of a lot of things. And I do a lot of news curation, or if I read articles, if I read papers, I'll then like take a screenshot of a paragraph that I really like and make a comment. So it's kind of, like, I used to really be into RSS feeds. Like I would follow like 100 or 200 websites, but that kind of died out. And I feel like Twitter really is the new aggregator. It's like where everything comes together. And the other social media platforms, to me, they're either not as open or they're more cluttered in several ways. So it's just, and I think, I don't know if Yoni agrees, but at least when it comes to news, like spreading news, it's really one of the main platforms for cryptocurrency. I do think Telegram is strong as well, but those are more chat groups. The architecture is not as open as Twitter is.
Yoni, what do you think?
I think Twitter has definitely become one of the main places where people talk about cryptocurrencies, even share technical analysis, share their views. I think there has been recent research on sort of the groups around Twitter, which include sort of, the Ethereum group and the Bitcoin group and the Bitcoin Cash group and the different big blockchain groups. So it acts a bit as an echo chamber. That's maybe some of its weaknesses, because once you follow people that share the same thoughts, you might find out you're talking to just like-minded people and within an echo chamber. Luckily, people on Twitter feel quite freely to troll others with their opinions. So I think that breaks a bit the barriers of the echo chambers.
And what about something like Facebook? Sorry, go ahead, jump into it.
Yeah, just real quick. So yeah, I think that it's true that there's definitely the echo chamber effect, but I think it's pretty much everywhere. You'll see that, and the nice thing that I like about Twitter is, like you say, like people. I mean, obviously we can call it trolling or something, but anybody is free to comment on any tweet, except if the author of that tweet has decided to block you. And so it's a very open platform, and that's I really enjoy that, where literally every tweet is just the start of a discussion, and people are free to disagree. And then of course it's up to you. Like if you as a Twitter person, if you decide to be very aggressive in blocking people, then yeah, of course you're going to have less dissenting opinions in your feed.
And I would imagine that something like Facebook is even more of an echo chamber, because that's a much more curated feed that you see. So what do you think the potential influence of Twitter versus something like Facebook could be in learning about this new sector?
Yoni, do you have any thoughts? Like Facebook, to me, like I'm about to delete my Facebook account. Like it's very like almost zero value to me in terms of learning about markets or technology.
Well, I'm still somewhat also a Facebook fan. I think it's used for something very different. Facebook is where I keep in touch with my friends, my high school friends, some members of the family, where they see pictures of my kids. And I think that's something very different than Twitter, where I get updated about what's happening in the industries I'm interested in. So I think it serves as different social functions, one more for external content, and one more for sort of private information of others. I'm sure Facebook themselves would want to take a bigger chunk of that. So of course these are all social networks competing, but definitely Twitter is a better place to read views that are not necessarily your friends' views, but people from the industry news, and sometimes also contrarian views.
And what about the dark side of Twitter? Do you think it should be more policed? I'm thinking of the scams and the abuse and the trolling. Do you think it should be more policed, or would that give it more of a centralized feel, which is anathema to the crypto community? Tor, do you want to jump in on this one?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, so I don't know. It's kind of annoying to see the scam accounts. What they'll do is they'll copy your profile photo, and they'll even copy your profile name and maybe like change the L with the capital I, or just make it really deceiving so that it seems like you're the one who is then promoting some kind of giveaway scam, because they try and entice you to. They say, give us 1 Ether and we'll give you back 10, like supposedly is some kind of game. But then really what happens is you just lose whatever coins you send to that account. So and Twitter has been taking action to try and, improve that. But I think that it's a delicate exercise for Twitter, because if they're too aggressive in censoring, then like a lot of legitimate accounts, for example, parody accounts, like if you want to make a parody of some famous personality, or in the crypto sphere we see it too, where people just kind of laugh at some person or joke around. So you don't want to make that go away, because that's part of what makes this Twitter so fun, is that anybody can just pseudonymously make an account. It doesn't have to be your own name. So to me, that's the price. There's just this constant back and forth between people that are trying to take advantage of the system, and then people that are just genuinely expressing opinions. So I don't know. I'm pretty pragmatic about that. There are a few tools available now, made by people who will scan your followers to see if some accounts seem like they are those scam accounts, and then you as an individual can actively block them preemptively so that they can no longer interact with your account. So that works pretty well for me. I'm actually pretty happy with how things are, and I'm sure that Twitter is working on. I kind of sounds like hearing myself talk, I feel like I sound like a Twitter spokesperson or something, but it's just, I don't know. I just genuinely think that there's a trade-off, and I feel like they're handling it pretty well so far.
And Yoni, is eToro's community active on Twitter, or do they just stick to the eToro platform? Do they rely on that much more to talk to each other?
We see some of our community also active on Twitter. I think eToro is more focused on your finance feed, so people mostly use eToro to share information specifically about the markets and communicate about their trading activity, which is usually a bit longer form than Twitter. So our popular investors who get copied would post weekly sort of update on their portfolio, which is, I think, a better use for eToro than just generic comments. But we definitely see users from eToro on Twitter as well.
And what about the communities that seem to be developing around various social media? I imagine you see the same in eToro, and I know that we see it in Twitter as well. Do you think communities are constructive in this case, Tor, or do you think that community, in this case, I'm thinking of the Bcash community, the 3M Classic community, do you think community as such doesn't really matter?
Well, community is probably a very big part of evaluation of every cryptocurrency. I mean, there are different models to value cryptocurrencies, but definitely the basic rule is how many people are holding it and how much each person on average is holding it. So the bigger the community, usually when they speak about a cryptocurrency, these are people who also hold the cryptocurrency, and that obviously is something super important for a crypto community. I would even say that the cryptocurrency is its community. So, the value of the cryptocurrency would directly be linked to the value of that community. In some cases, I think Ripple is the clearest example of that. There's the XRP army who are sort of posting all around, protecting the Ripple vision and values, and argue relentlessly with Bitcoin maximalists on Twitter. So I think that's a big part of what Ripple is. And probably the same around every single cryptocurrency can be measured by the power of its community.
And the impact of the sentiment. What do you think, Tor?
Yeah, I have a different perspective, and it's probably, I don't know, it's probably informed by me being, my profile is more that of a value investor. I want to invest in things that, I think are going to be around 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and I want to see them be really big. And so my view is that in the short term, sentiment and community does drive a lot of, price action and trends. But over the long run, it's usually technology that wins out. Kazaa, for example, had a lively community, but eventually it was BitTorrent that won out. Yahoo had amazing communities, but eventually it was Google that had the better technology. When I try and value cryptocurrencies, I mostly look at the developers that are involved, and I want to see that they just have very high pedigree. I want to look at security standards, at the economics that are involved, scaling prospects, code review. Those kind of things are, when I'm trying to see whether there's any long-term merit to a cryptocurrency project, that's what I'm looking at. Because I guess my view is that, communities, and especially when it comes to there's a financial interest, people's enthusiasm can fade pretty quickly, and they can just move on to another community pretty quickly. So to me, the stickiness really comes from the utility and the efficiency, and in the case of cryptocurrency, from the security of the protocol.
Yoni, how would you recommend our listeners use Twitter to judge community sentiment?
Well, I think you can definitely, just use the hashtag or the dollar sign of each of the cryptocurrencies to search and find different views, both the supporting views, the contrarian views. I definitely, by the way, agree with Tur that you need much more than just to look at sentiment. And if you're just looking at sentiment, you might get very confused as well, because there's a lot of contrarian sentiment as well. I think from that point of view, Ripple is also an interesting example, because there are a lot of Ripple haters, and you'd see that on Twitter as well. So you definitely need to look at more than sentiment analysis, but sentiment analysis, I think, eventually helps you form a thought of whether people are now interested in buying more or not. Definitely, as we can all see, there has been a huge drop in sentiment in the crypto market in general in the last 6 months, which is followed by and led by, at the same time, the bearish market we're at. So if you look at the levels of interest even from Google Trends, people searching for words like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple, you'd see that they've peaked, I think, at 5 or even 10 times more of where they are today. And that basically means also that the customer demand to buy those cryptocurrencies has fallen, followed by, obviously, a fallen price.
And Tur, how important do you think crypto Twitter is for the sector's development compared to something like Reddit, for instance?
Well, I mean, first of all, for the sector's development, in terms of producing code and those kind of things, like developers have their own channels. They use GitHub all the time. They have email lists, like very sounds very ancient, but they actually mostly communicate through those channels. There's some IRC chats. So really, when it comes to development, if Twitter were to shut down tomorrow, that would be fine. Like those cryptocurrencies would be fine. Yeah. It's mostly the investors that communicate, and of course the companies that build on Bitcoin or on other cryptocurrencies. They do use social media to kind of spread the word about new possibilities and options, and so that is a valuable tool. Sorry, I kind of, with that caveat, I forgot the question. Would you remind me?
How important is crypto Twitter for the sector's development compared to something like Reddit, which we haven't mentioned yet?
Right. Yeah, so I think Reddit is great for very early on. If things are very small, and but there is momentum. Like I remember when I first subscribed to our Bitcoin on Reddit, it had 5,000 subscribers.
How long ago was
that? That must have been 2011.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, but so early on, the people that were on there were highly technical, highly knowledgeable. So you got these really interesting threads. Also, Bitcoin Talk was an interesting forum, and Twitter was just not on the radar because most engineers don't really use Twitter, at least not back then. So it was really great, and I think I've seen that repeatedly, where Reddit is great for like an up and coming community. But once things get large, it becomes, the quality of the discussion goes down quite a bit, and because it's a voting system. So if people don't have a deep understanding of a subject, they will not upvote what is maybe the most technically interesting discussion. They'll just upvote what they understand, and so it becomes a little bit dumbed down eventually. So
like
to me, Twitter,
because
you can focus on the individuals, and so you can, as you learn, you can quote unquote upgrade and choose to follow individuals that maybe are more technical or have a vocabulary that fits where you are on the curve.
But definitely, by the way, GitHub is also a very interesting social network for the crypto market, as a lot of the developers would go through the actual sort of work and repositories of other developers and other people they're speaking to, which I think is a very interesting development in social signals, to be able to look at the project's code and sort of how many active developers are in a project and how much do they commit, and how much others are pulling that specific project. I think that's a very interesting social signal. And I think there's obviously also Telegram, which is more towards groups, either signal groups or the ICO groups, but obviously they've seen the impact of the crypto community on Telegram, and I would guess that was one of the reasons they felt very confident in running an ICO, is they felt the entire crypto community is already on Telegram.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you know of investors starting to use GitHub?
Of investors that?
Yeah, investors starting to look at GitHub for social signals. Have you heard of cases of that?
I definitely know investors in the ICO market that are looking at GitHub. So one of the great ways to check a project is to simply check their GitHub and go over their activity, and if you're qualified sufficiently, even try to build what they've built yourself to see if everything is intact and quality of code, etc. So definitely GitHub is a great way to analyze a project's development.
And speaking of project,
I can add something to that. Yeah, so just a thought, because what you can measure on social media is activity and sentiment. It does that pretty well. There's some challenges, and I think there's challenges really across all platforms. Is that basically Sybil attacks are pretty easy to do. Like, you can create a bot army that is going to generate a certain amount of activity. Then if you analyze it, it looks like, oh wow, there's like, seemingly organic activity that could be an indicator to buy or to sell. So that's a challenge. And on GitHub, the challenge there is that I don't think there's so much spoofing happening, that people pretend to be active where it's really not. But the challenge there is that if you don't have full stack knowledge, or you don't have access to an auditor or somebody who's an expert to help you review the code, it's just kind of impossible to say what the quality of the work is. Like, yeah, you see activity, but how do you know the quality? And so lately, there's this initiative, it's called Cryptoinfluencers.io, that I thought was interesting. Not so much this particular website, but the idea that if you look at who follows each other on social media, you kind of can use this. You can build up an idea about who has more influence than somebody else, and so things like that exist as well in the developer space, where certain developers follow other developers more, and so you could kind of and in that way you can weigh the activity. If somebody's a rockstar developer, then that activity should be more important than a complete beginner who just adds some code to a project. So just wanted to add that as just a side thought, that influence is hard to measure, but it's really important, and quality is also hard to measure, but that's in the long run the most important, I would argue.
But we seem to have more tools now that adds transparency to credibility, at least. I'd like to talk a bit about the market tour. And in an op-ed published in CoinDesk today, you say that although you remain long-term bullish on Bitcoin, you expect short-term price weakness. Could you elaborate a bit on that for our listeners?
Yeah, the title of our piece is that we don't expect new highs in 2018, and the high last year was $20,000. So it's pretty conservative for us to say Bitcoin is 7,000 now. We don't think it's going to triple in 6 months. Of course, this is crypto, and so even that is seen as like, oh well, that's kind of a downer to put it that way. But yeah, I do expect prices to move sideways or down rather than up. And the gist of my argument is just that the rally that we've seen across these cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular, it was 30 months of this incredible bull rally, of course, with a few corrections, but never really a stagnant or a bearish period. And so I think that the market needs some time to cool down. I think that the infrastructure needs time to catch up. I think we might see some stress tests when it comes to custody of these assets. We could see more hacks and smart contracts that get exploited and all kinds of surprises because, the value of the whole space has done about 100x in 30 months. And so the infrastructure really needs to catch up. And I just think that a little more time makes sense. Also, looking at the charts, I just don't see a bottoming pattern yet. I think that even if we can go up to $11,000 or $13,000, I think it's still going to keep trading in a range. And then I see Bitcoin as the reserve currency of the space, and so if Bitcoin isn't going to do too well, the risk involved in all the other currencies is much, much higher on many fronts, like regulatory, security. And so I don't see them, maybe some exceptions, but as a whole, I don't see that outperforming Bitcoin either. So yeah, the next 6 months, I'm not saying, sell everything. I'm not giving financial advice regardless, but it's more of a caution to people who might want to go like levered long or something, thinking that the market is going to be at 30,000 by the end of the year. I would caution for that.
And also definitely taken from the value investing point of view.
Yeah, it's like yeah, exactly. If you look at activity, that we were talking about activity, so you can look at the activity on the Bitcoin blockchain and see how much value is being transferred on a daily basis, and you can see how many addresses are active, and then you can compare that with the market cap. And so doing that, you can look back 7-8 years and try to estimate, like, are we currently overvalued or undervalued? And those indicators actually do signal overvaluation still. There's the NVM ratio, the NVT ratio. Those two are still signaling overvaluation, which, it's not a crystal ball. It's not, it's just a signal, but it is signaling bearish for the moment.
Yoni, what do you think? You said you're bullish on Bitcoin. What's your short-term outlook?
First of all, I take in general a longer-term approach. So from a longer-term approach, I think Bitcoin specifically has reached a level of brand awareness that it's going to be extremely hard to depeg it as the sort of reserve currency of the space, which is why, and I think, again, from the long-term perspective, that the space is still in its infancy compared to where it can go. Because I think that the world is in a state where it makes sense to have a non-government digital private money. And if that's the case and Bitcoin does become the private money of future generations, then it could significantly go up in the future. Having said that, the markets have sort of their own way of acting, and definitely I'm hearing more very smart people like Tor that have had experience and have seen previous correction in the market indicate somewhat of a mediocre range in the next 6 months. I think that the big question is when is the next rally going to happen, and whether high net individuals and financial institutions are going to participate in the next rally. And if that's the case, then I would say that the next rally would actually break probably the records of the previous rally, especially on the bigger coins. But again, that depends on some of the regulatory framework and how and I think a lot of financial institutions are waiting to see whether, from regulatory point of view, these assets become more legitimized. So I would say that the next 6 months is still a question mark. Our internal analysis is suggesting there is some upward movement towards the end of the year. But again, in these markets, as we've seen last year, everything is possible.
And when you mention the rally, for instance, towards the end of the year, what do you think it will take to get that going? Tor mentioned infrastructure. You mentioned that also. Do you think that is what the market's waiting for, or is it more regulatory clarity?
I think the market requires regulatory certainty in order for financial institutions to come in, but as Tor suggested, they also need infrastructure like custodian solutions, regulated firms that can provide service to other financial institutions. I think eventually the market as a whole will truly correct when the sentiment changes. The best way maybe to track that is simply with Google Trends. So when more and more people start talking about, it's very cyclical. So if prices go up, we see interest going up almost immediately. And when interest goes up, eventually that leads also to prices going up. So what needs to happen in order for that spiral to begin is some significant amounts of money to go into the market, and those are probably financial institutions and high net individuals or ultra high net individuals.
And Tor, what do you think is needed still? What's the main need in the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency infrastructure generally?
Yeah, I mean, what's needed, nothing fundamentally different. Like, I actually think that regulation is going to follow the market in the long run, because politicians, they like to walk in front of the parade. They like to be seen as aggressive and kind of allowing for technology to prosper, those kind of things. And so if the market gives a strong signal that something's happening, of course, I'm talking over the long run. In the short term, you can always have pushback. And also, if you look at it from a global scale, I think that's usually what happens, is that regulation just adapts to the reality. And a lot of European regulators, they kind of regret having missed out on a lot of the internet boom because they were too harshly regulating internet startups in the 2000s. So maybe that'll be different this time around. But yeah, for me, fundamentally, nothing has to change. Things just have to keep going the way they are. And I mean, I agree with Yoni. I'm especially on Bitcoin, I'm super bullish, just because it's hard money, and it already has this incredible track record of continuous uptime, global accessibility, censorship resistance, highly secure, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, maybe most importantly, having a very strict and predictable financial policy baked into the protocol, which makes it superior as a savings instrument over most any digital asset, especially fiat money, because you can just print more money whenever you want to. So for me, what could be the catalyst? I do think the market needs stories. Like any kind of trend change is usually based on some kind of narrative that changes as well. And so, for example, if in early 2019, if we get signals that a Bitcoin ETF is approved, that would be huge, because then investors can extremely easily get exposure to Bitcoin, and same for institutions. And also, institutions are looking for better ways, or I guess I need to say ways to custody the assets that they feel more comfortable with than are available today. And that's kind of the boon of this massive rally, is that it's really started this machinery. It's really been a strong signal to Fortune 500 companies, like, hey, this thing's here to stay. And if you want to take part in it, now is the time to build infrastructure. And so we're seeing, the company that owns the New York Stock Exchange, they're building a Bitcoin exchange. I think it was just now Goldman Sachs is going to build a trading desk for cryptocurrencies. So they just want in. And the adoption of Bitcoin is it's still nothing. It's 2% adoption. So I think that's going to go to maturation eventually. I think eventually everybody's going to have some kind of Bitcoin exposure, and most people won't touch Bitcoin directly. It'll be in their pension fund. It'll be held by insurance companies that they have policies with, et cetera, because it's such an excellent reserve asset. So I think that institutional adoption is key. And like Yoni said, high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, they have the money and the connections to basically buy the dip. They can buy the bottom of this market. If we go down to $5,000, $3,000, they will be the ones that will build a bottom in the market.
Yoni, what catalyst are you waiting for?
First of all, it's not necessarily waiting. We're doing a lot of work in eToro to progress, add more cryptos, and launch more services. So we're super excited about the fact that when we talk today to other financial institutions and strategic partners, they all understand the value of the blockchain as technology. They all already estimate that blockchain is here to stay, crypto is here to stay, there's going to be a significant pivotal change to how financial services are being run in general. A lot of great groups that have been building both significant wealth and great strategies to sort of leverage that wealth on top of crypto. I think the market is definite. I think, again, for pension funds to come in, I think we're still at least 6 months away from the right infrastructure to sort of set up. So I think that's not going to happen in 2018. So what could happen in 2018 is just the notion that they might come in 2019, and that's things like the ETF being approved, more companies like ICE, the owner of NICE coming in, Starbucks starting to accept Bitcoin. That's something, by the way, that we haven't discussed so much. One of the reasons for downtrend pressure is that a lot of the companies raising funds in cryptocurrencies immediately sell those cryptocurrencies for fiat and then manage their expenses in fiat. I think we are going to gradually see a transition of ICO companies managing their expenses more in crypto, and hopefully we'll see also more stores and more merchants willing to accept crypto.
What's your take, Tor, on the ICE announcement, the owner of the New York Stock Exchange, that they are going to be rolling out Bitcoin-settled futures sometime in the near future? Do you think that will have a big impact on market liquidity?
On market liquidity, yeah. I mean, just the more tools there are to trade and to arbitrage and basically give funds access, right? I mean, especially trading firms, they are the market makers, and they basically are helping for the price to be more homogeneous and for the volatility to go down. And they have certain legal restrictions, and more platforms, especially the more high pedigree platforms, start activating Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, the more liquid the market is going to become. Yeah, just extremely positive. And so, I guess it's kind of a controversial thing, like the financialization of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in this space, because a lot of people feel very idealistic that people should have, control of their own private keys and those kind of things. But to me, it's an and, it's not an or. And the fact that you have that possibility, you can store your own private keys and live in Venezuela and, have a multi-sig wallet and have your family members control that robustly. But at the same time, Bitcoin can be a financial asset that is held by pension funds. I think it's just, we need, if we want for this to become a very mature ecosystem, we just need that part as well, where there's derivatives and futures. And futures basically allow you to make more granular bets on where the price is going to go, and that informs other market participants. And so it's, as long as everything is, as there's no fraud and deception, then I'm very excited about all these evolutions.
And Yoni, what's your take on this? I mean, do you see the ICE collaboration foray into retail payments through their collaboration with Starbucks? Do you see a demand for that kind of service?
Yes, I definitely think more merchants accepting Bitcoin will eventually lead to people using Bitcoin as also a payment channel. I think the development over Lightning Network significantly supports that, as potentially you can pay without fees. And I think it's a big part of that. So if you think about the three functions of money as store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account, I think that the one that's missing the most is an efficient medium of exchange. And that's because while it is a very good medium of exchange for ICOs, so a lot of the ICOs have been done with cryptocurrency, I think it needs to have more uses than just investing in other cryptocurrencies.
In crystal ball time, Yoni, in a couple of years, 2 years, or 10 years, whichever, or both, what do you think the main use case of Bitcoin will be as a payment method, either through buying a cup of coffee or remittances, or do you think it will still be store of value?
Well, I have a very sort of large perspective on crypto and blockchain in general in 10 years. I think we're going to see something in the range of $100 trillion on the blockchains. I think eventually regulators will shift from being a bit concerned around blockchain to actually mandate financial services firms to use blockchain for financial assets. So I think we're seeing basically a process of digitalization in digital native assets. I think most of the financial assets in existence 10 years from now are going to get tokenized or blockchained. There are some arguments on that, but I think, again, generally, public ledgers makes a lot of sense for regulators, for central bank issued digital currencies. And I think once all of these happen, the value of Bitcoin will significantly rise because it will enable a medium of exchange between all those different assets that might be on multiple different blockchains, but eventually in order to settle between whether it's oil and gold from two different countries, or whether it's stocks from one country and a fiat currency of another country, it'd probably be quite efficient to do it through Bitcoin.
Opening up new economies. Do you think that Bitcoin will continue to be the main blockchain going forward, Yoni?
I would, again, from a brand awareness point of view, definitely assume that Bitcoin is going to be the leader in the private money type of crypto, so non-government issued private money. We are definitely going to see some sort of government, state, big bank issued cryptocurrencies, which will be very different to what we call cryptocurrencies today. And a lot of and there's a big question about the acceptance eventually of regulators to a form of non-government issued decentralized store of value. within sort of the scope of the non-government issued decentralized money, I think Bitcoin's brand awareness is definitely the highest and will be the highest, because when most people think about cryptocurrencies, they think about Bitcoin. Ethereum, on the other hand, serves a very different and a very interesting utility as sort of a capital markets place, almost an exchange. Instead of to regulated securities, it acts as an exchange to basically token issuance and ICOs raising money. By far, I think, the most active space today in the cryptocurrency world, and the transaction fees on Ethereum alone represent already about $50 million revenues a year, or fees paid on Ethereum, which I think definitely enables Ethereum to grow further.
Tor, what do you think about Bitcoin's dominance as a cryptocurrency going forward? And do you see it being used for retail payments at some stage in the near future?
Right. So I try to really, look at the evidence again and again, because I'm trying to be aware that I might have survivor's bias. Like, I was early in Bitcoin, and so that's kind of my thing, and I understand it. And so if there's competition, then I might be naturally skeptic with no good reason. But so far, I'm still convinced that Bitcoin is going to grow in market share more than it is today. Right now, it's about 50% of all value in the cryptocurrencies are in Bitcoin. If you look at market caps, I think that's going to grow to 80% or higher, and that's because I think that a lot of the functionality that is attributed to the ICOs or the ICO platforms like Ethereum can be embedded in Bitcoin in a better way. And people probably ask, like, oh, why haven't you done it so far? It's because the Bitcoin architecture vision is modular, and so it just takes time to build a new layer on top of Bitcoin, and then build things on that, then just launch a new blockchain that has the functionality right away, but that makes some significant trade-offs. And so my concern has been about most of these blockchains is that their privacy is very bad, and they don't scale well, and their security is not good either. And so with Bitcoin, you can have a very secure but minimal main infrastructure, which is the blockchain, and that it's so limited that, like, the colored coins that we were talking about early in this call, you can't really do it on Bitcoin because it just requires too much space on the blockchain. But now with sidechains and federated sidechains, you can actually publish very private smart contracts that allow you to issue assets that are traded in the Bitcoin ecosystem and have the Bitcoin security to them. And similar to privacy, if you look at the Lightning Network, it's highly private. It's very similar to how the Tor browser works, which is onion routing. And so to me, all those elements that I'm hearing in the altcoin ecosystem of, like, our coin focuses on this or focuses on that, Bitcoin can offer as well. And of course, there's the brand awareness as well. And then I would add as well the developer pedigree. It's completely unrivaled, in my opinion. The quality and the track record of the people that are developing Bitcoin is just it's stellar. Those are the people that have actually built significant parts of the internet infrastructure, like the internet protocols, those kind of things. So yeah, and in that sense, I'm very much a free market person, and so I think that we will always have an incredible variety of cryptocurrencies and blockchain projects. But in terms of the value that the market is going to attribute to each of those protocols, I think Bitcoin is going to be more or less a winner take all, and that we'll see some niche uses next to that.
Going under the hood of Bitcoin in terms of Bitcoin development, what's going on that you're particularly excited about? You mentioned a bunch of changes, improvements, things that people are working on. What are you most excited about?
You asking me or both of us?
Matthew, we'll start with you, Tor, and then...
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so Lightning has been a long time coming, and now it's here, and people are seeing that it's actually being used. Lightning basically is a smart contract layer on top of Bitcoin that allows people to still trustlessly settle transactions, but do it much more faster than you could do on the main chain, and also more privately. There's a little bit of a security trade-off, but it's not extreme. The transactions are processed in a different way, and that allows for millions of transactions per second. And so that is why companies like Starbucks can now really get excited, because people have tried retail payments on Bitcoin for a long time, but you just keep running into the limited block size of the chain. So that's one. Schnorr signatures is probably going to be merged into Bitcoin, which allows for more privacy. It's also a more efficient use of the Bitcoin blockchain, and also smart contracts, different types and more interesting types of smart contracts will be possible once we have Schnorr. But the integration of SegWit last year, that was really a huge thing, which was basically a bug fix that's happened, and that enabled the Lightning Network. So to me, anything else that's merged into the Bitcoin core protocol is kind of bonus. Like, it's not 100% necessary. And also, like, over the long run, we want that layer to be extremely stable. So we only want very minor changes going forward. And then we want for the real, innovation to happen on the layers on top. So that's I'm actually more excited right now about just institutional integration, financialization of Bitcoin. I think that is, at least just from my point of view, that's where the real exciting stuff is happening right now.
Yoni, what are you most excited about in Bitcoin development at the moment, either under the hood or going on in the general sector?
I definitely think Lightning is super important. I'm not as bullish as Tor on tokenization on top of Bitcoin, at least not yet, just because I think Ethereum sort of stole the thunder there, but everything could happen. And I think it's interesting to see more big companies go into crypto, like Starbucks. I think we need more of these large companies, large retailers suddenly accepting payments in Bitcoin would definitely fuel more usage in Bitcoin and show how it's usable as a medium of exchange, and enable companies to basically collect Bitcoin. Because once they do, ideally, they also need to learn how to custody their Bitcoin, and if the price goes up, then suddenly they get suddenly in the game very large corporates. I'm super excited to potentially also, I hope to see DAOs emerging on Ethereum. I think that could be a very significant change into the ICO ecosystem if we start seeing governance on chain. I think that's a super enthusiastic vision, seeing sort of budget managed and groups managing governance on chain.
A lot to look forward to. Yoni, what can we expect to hear from eToro over the next few months? What have you got? What are you working on?
Well, we're launching now our wallet in beta mode, so we're starting to launch it to selected customers. We've done a very long and interesting route to get, as we're a regulated financial institution, get it together with the regulators, what's the right structure, so regulators feel comfortable with it. We're also, we've announced that we're working on an exchange that's going to be launched later this year. And we're also excited about launching eToro in the U.S. later this year. So we have a lot on our plate, and a lot of it driven by the magnificent crypto bull run.
And that's excellent. And of course your team. Where will the exchange be based?
We'll announce that shortly.
Okay, good to know. And when you mention the regulators for the wallet, what regulators are you talking to?
We've been talking to several regulators, including the Gibraltar regulator and the European regulators, as well as the FCA. I think a lot of the concerns regulators have are about anti-money laundering in the crypto space and how you manage and measure those risks, as well as rightfully a lot of the cyber concerns that they have when either you let customers keep their private keys, and where's the responsibility of a financial institution in that case, or when you custody customers' private keys, and what is the level of protection you can give your customers from potential fraud?
Well, we're all very much looking forward to hearing more about that when you release when the news comes out. And I want to thank you both very much for your time today, for sharing your expertise and your experience. I want to thank all of you listeners for joining us. I hope you've learned as much as I have. We will be uploading the webinar to the CoinDesk website within the next couple of days. So do please come back and listen again. I certainly will. And do please tell your friends about it as well. Thank you all so much for joining. It's been a pleasure, and talk to you all soon, I hope.
Thank you very much, Noel, and thank you, Tor, for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thank you.